It is the second model of the 2023 Gridman Universe collaboration with Meteorot S. It is GDM01 BurnKnight, with the kit of anti-jammer, anti-float, Tsujigiri, light legs, and the leg ability of Elusive, which grants a damage reduction if the user's evade is higher than that of the target. Now, as this another model of the Gridman Universe collab, Full Power Grid and Kaiser Grid both gave us a very nice taste and sneak peek of all the very powerful skills that are being introduced to the game, and BurnKnight is most certainly no exception to this, as even though he may play as a somewhat rather niche kind of fighter, in those particularly niche moments he can be an absolute nightmare, terror, and harbinger of death, destruction, and chaos to the enemy team involved. Anti-Jammer is a brand new skill and a support skill being introduced into the game, but once activated, basically it will take all incoming anti-sea and anti-air attacks and convert them into normal damage if attacking their respective targets. That means instead of the ×5 bonus that you will get upon using anti-air on a flight-based foe, you instead will be dealing that same old minimal damage to them as you did before, and as if they weren't even flight legs for that turn. However, it is also worth noting this only lasts for 2 turns though, so this will need to be reapplied continually if you want to keep that effect active. But it does give you that chance to kind of breathe a little easier and factor it into the team if you want to try to cover that weakness and see the enemy is absolutely going to be using it. The right arm of anti-float is another brand new skill to the game, and folks have been waiting on this one for quite some time, if I'm being completely honest with you. But explaining what anti-float does, it is essentially the same as anti-air is to flight and anti-sea is to aquatic legs. But that means it'll be dealing massive damage to anyone that is using float legs, which of course are the best all-rounded leg, especially if they are a boss type like Metal Eater, Spinag, or Artemis, but in all other cases deal minimum damage to all other leg types in all other cases. It does honestly lead me to believe that anti-jammer will file into this moderately well. I don't know if it includes anti-float in this case and it's just anti in general, but that is left to be determined once he does officially go live. Tsujigiri on the left arm, we've seen a pretty fair handful of times already with Sword Blues from the Rockman collab, and Bisha Mokubera from the 7 Lucky Gods, but explaining Tsujigiri again, just so he has his time in the limelight, it does also translates roughly to Night Slash or Backslash, and as one would expect, upon attacking a target in the backside and their cooldown phase, it will triple your damage and absolutely lay waste to all targets that turn their back to you. If you manage to attack someone in the front, however, you will be dealing very minimal, if any, noticeable damage at all. So as you see here, BurnKnight is a relatively niche kind of fighter, specializing in making sure that he can cover his foes using flight or sea legs, or laying waste to anyone that shows their back to him or is using float legs. But in all their cases, he can be an absolute nightmare and terror to anyone involved. Flight legs means he will have very good coverage across most terrains and have a very high base mobility, as expected of flight legs, with the mobility of 1088 most certainly packing that high mobility as you expect. And of course, with flight legs, he also is packing a very high base evade at 1736. This means he will have a pretty solid time dodging or grazing a lot of attacks, and making use of anti-jammer means that he can cover his own weakness of anti-air moderately well as long as that effect is in play. However, having a melee resist and a shoot resist of just barely 500 is unfortunately going to be one of his biggest weaknesses in this case, as it does mean that he will be taking a pretty significantly higher amount of damage from pretty much any attack that does manage to land on him. And it does mean he will be relying on his high evade very moderately to keep his damage as low as possible by dodging or grazing. But the leg ability of Elusive does tie back into this to kind of help round it out just a little bit more and keep him alive longer on the field. All this being said, as a pure set score, I do honestly have to rate BurnKnight a very solid 7 out of 10. Despite the fact that he is moderately niche in what he offers between anti-jammer, anti-float, and Tsujigiri, and his synergy is kind of all over the place to a point, he does pack some very, very dangerous skills that if used correctly and in the right fields and with the right enemy lineups, he will honestly be your front runner, your MVP, and your star of the show pretty much just by existing. even if it does mean he has to time his attacks or juggle it just a little bit in order to truly capitalize on that. However, like I mentioned, a couple noticeable weaknesses to mention. His armor is rather light, because, as expected of a flight-based model like him, with a head HP of 3100, a right arm of 2900, and a left arm of 2750, and legs also at 2750. He is moderately light in the armor department, and his damage reduction is most certainly going to be really struggling there too. So he is going to be very, very heavily banking on the elusive leg ability and his dodging or grazing to keep his damage as low as possible. But in all other situations, as long as he does not have anti-jammer active, you could honestly take him down very, very easily with anti-air, pretty much as you would any other flight-based target. As mixed parts, though, I very easily, absolutely have to rate him an 8.5 out of 10. Even though his synergy, like I said, is kind of all over the place between all three of his skills, if you were to mix Anti-Float and Tsujigiri on separate parts or across the team, you can absolutely and very, very easily capitalize on the very chaotic and destructive nature that both those parts offer. Anti-Float honestly speaks for itself of how nasty it can be, not especially given the fact that we have a lot of boss-type bots available in the game that are float leg or transform into a float leg. Again, some popular examples include Metal Eater, Death Glare, Spanagma Nog, or even Grain when transformed as well. So this can make a very, very good way to capitalize and even dissuade or even discourage or scare some enemies from using float-based legs just by having this on the team. And Tsujigiri, of course, to anyone that manages to show you their backside and not quite finish their cooldown phase, absolutely once again lay waste to any and all involved. So those will definitely be the two really big parts you want to pull out of this, and while Anti-Jammer most certainly will have its uses as well, Anti-Float and Tsujigiri will most certainly be your MVP parts if you do choose to go after BurnKnight.